I've got another example here of the news industry, 1981.
When the telephone connection between these two terminals is made, the newest form of electronic journalism lights up Mr. Halloran's television with just about everything the Examiner prints in its regular edition. That is, with the exception of pictures, ads, and the comics. 8 newspapers around the country are currently in the computer network, and within the next few weeks, 3 others will join in.
This is an experiment. We're trying to figure out what it's going to mean to us as editors and reporters and what it means to the home user. And we're not in it to make money. We're probably not going to lose a lot, but we aren't going to make much either.
That was 1981, 14 years even before the interview that I described with Bill Gates. And this was when the San Francisco Examiner newspaper and a number of others tried to embrace some new technology. And what strikes me really is that, again, even for those who embrace the technology early, it can be so hard to predict how this is going to turn out. And I think you can see today the news industry is still struggling to adapt to these new media. And people have mentioned Twitter quite a few times today. And you can see here, this was something from earlier on in the year, I think it was January, when that amazing scene of the plane landing or crashing in the Hudson in New York. And the story was broken a couple of minutes later, really by observers. And this particular person happened to be very nearby, and he had a camera phone, as most people do now. He took a photo and he published it on Twitter, and he helped to break this story before the news networks did. So if you compare this to the scene that you just saw in 1981, how things have changed, how could anyone have possibly predicted where this was going to go? And still we're trying to adapt in the news media, in the news industry, to these new media. Another example of Twitter and other forms of news breaking is when Michael Jackson died in June. He died in the afternoon in Los Angeles, and the story was first broken by a gossip blog in LA 14 minutes after the time of death. 14 minutes after. And as soon as it was broken in that gossip blog, within minutes there were up to 5,000 tweets per second. This was fully 2 hours before CNN was able to confirm his death. The LA Times got there a little bit earlier. But you can see the huge turmoil in this industry. And we're still adapting to this new form. News is adapting to this new form. And if we look at the different types of advertising that are around on the internet, search has been around for a while, as has display and video. Search advertising really wasn't sorted out or improved dramatically, I think adapted to the new media until Overture, which was later bought by Yahoo and Google, dramatically improved the nature of search advertising around the end of the 90s or early 2000s. And although the ads they're not entertaining, they're just text ads on the right-hand side, they're very, very well adapted to that medium. When people are going to a search engine with the intention to search for something. Display ads, I think, took longer to adapt. When the internet first came to prevalence in the 90s, you probably all remember those quite annoying flashing banners, pop-ups, all that kind of thing. So although the advertising was there, it really hadn't adapted in form. Things are getting an awful lot better now, as you may or may not have noticed, with different video ads and display ads. I think when you look at social networking, it's even people from Facebook and so forth would probably admit that the monetization element of that, the advertising model, hasn't fully been cracked yet. Although, of course, they're betting that it will be soon by them. But the users are certainly there. The content is there. Just the advertising hasn't quite followed yet, as it has in search and in display. And then in mobile is probably at a less advanced stage again. It's hardly out of the technology stage. And I think with phones like the iPhone and other smartphones, the users and the content will follow very rapidly over the next few years. So there are a few key trends that I think are going to be important in 5 years' time. and they will probably have changed the nature of many of your jobs. The first is that things will be localized down to you. And Carolyn from Vodafone mentioned the location element of that in a mobile earlier. But there's more to it than that, because in any sort of internet media, it's bidirectional. If you compare that to broadcast TV or broadcast radio, which is one way only, on the internet and in mobile, you have the potential to send back information as well as receive. And you can have very localized services just for you as a result. And I'll show you one example of an interesting app. What this does is it enables you to hold up your mobile phone, and with the camera, it will identify objects in your vicinity and give you information about those objects. So the app was, in this particular video, it's showing real estate information, I think, in Paris. Now, this was actually a fairly simple app for iPhones and for Android devices, using really all existing technology. All it did was use the camera on the phone, and it cross-referenced against a local database, a repository of information about objects in your vicinity. And you could imagine all sorts of possible applications here, whether it's tourist information or so forth. And so in the marketing world, really, you've got to think about how you're going to adapt to this kind of media, because an advertisement or some sort of product message in this media will have to be very, very different to the kind of message on a TV or on radio or even on a traditional web page on your PC at home. The next big one is user-generated content. And this has been mentioned quite a few times today already. How many people here have a Facebook account? And if you could leave your hands up, how many have updated the profile or something in the last 30 days? Okay, so most. And I may be getting into dangerous territory here, but the age profile of the room is probably late 20s, early 30s, mostly, something like that. Tom has a very young face. He couldn't be any more than 23, maybe. So maybe it's not surprising, but this is a very big change. And as I said, there are hundreds of millions of users now. I think Facebook has 200 million users who update their profile every month. It's just an enormous number. And you saw a statistic earlier on that YouTube has become the second biggest search engine in the world after Google, and ahead of Yahoo and Bing, for example. People are spending an awful lot of their time on YouTube, on Flickr, on Facebook. And I think when you try to get your message, the message of your company, of your product, to people in these media, it will have to be very, very different. And has anyone here heard of a guy called Charlie, who has a YouTube channel called Charlie Is So Cool Like? Has anyone heard of him? No? I can't see. Yes, okay, so some people have. Charlie is an 18-year-old guy who lives with his mum in Somerset in England. And a couple of years ago, he started a video blog, a video diary, because he was kind of 16, he was bored at home with his mom. And it became a phenomenon. Over the last couple of years, he's attracted 23 million views on his, and he now has his own YouTube channel. And he came into Google, our London office, a little while ago, and he said something very interesting. And the audience was a group of bigwigs across the industry. Outside Google, we had the head of marketing at Nokia globally, for example, a lot of other very senior marketing people around the world. And he said, one of the things that I find funny is that adults think the internet world and the real world are separate and are different. And it certainly struck me because the first time I saw Facebook, and I work at Google, I've worked in the technology industry all my life, I started as an engineer. Still, the first time I saw Facebook, I thought, yeah, I don't know. And maybe I'm unique here, but from talking to a lot of people, I think a lot of people thought that at the start. They thought, okay, is this a bit of a fad? And still, I hear people on the radio practically every day saying something like, why don't these kids just get outside and make real friends? And that's fine, but Charlie gets it and they don't. And this guy, Charlie, said something very interesting, and it's going to be very important to anybody here who works in marketing, that they get it. And I think Carolyn from Vodafone earlier showed that she got it, and she knew that this was around to stay. And the next big one here, I think, goes a little bit against what one of the first speakers today said. That's marketing is the new finance, with a sample size of all. And what I mean by that is that we now have data through websites and through other social media that we never would have had before. Jonathan Rosenberg, who runs product development at Google, he was asked last year what skills would be most needed in the decade ahead. And he's a Silicon Valley guy, spent his whole career there, and runs products at Google. So you would have expected him maybe to say software engineers. He said statisticians. And what he was getting at was that the amount of data that we're now collecting is unprecedented. And so there may be many people representing companies here who've been used to dealing with large amounts of data in the past. For example, telecoms companies have been dealing with it for a long time. Banks, they're pretty good at it. But most small and medium-sized businesses have never had to deal with the quantities of data that they now have. And some of them still ignore it. Anybody with a website now has access to enormous and extremely valuable information about how users get to their site, how they interact with the brand, how they interact with the site, how they move around, how they purchase. And some people are choosing to ignore it, but those who aren't really need to understand how to analyze data. And so I think that's what the statistician comment was about. And actually, within Google, we don't have a particularly large marketing department. It's very small. Actually, marketing budgets are small at Google. And it was mostly a word-of-mouth phenomenon in the early years. But we do have a quantitative marketing team. And they're PhD statisticians who are able to mine data. Because the amount of data that Google and that AIB gather is enormous. And the amount of data that all of you gather through the websites that your companies offer is enormous. And you need to have somebody who knows how to glean insights from that.